Welcome to the fourth conference by Pakistan Progressive Forum. This is our first online conference. Before that, we have done 3 physically in North America, and now this is fourth. We are trying to expand the reach of our conferences. So this is the first virtual conference. This is organized by Pakistan Progressive Forum, which is a group of old progressive workers from Pakistan who are living in North America. The purpose of Pakistan Progressive Forum is to empower Pakistani diaspora in North America through education, leadership, youth development, and civic engagement, fostering lifelong connections and collaboration. PPF bridges communities by promoting cultural exchanges, amplifying voices, and connected institutions in the North America and Pakistan to drive impactful partnership and progress across sectors and create bridges between people of Pakistan and North America. The topic of today's conference is Changing Global Order and Future of Pakistan. When we decided to hold this conference, the world map was a little different. It was almost a month ago when it was divided, and there was no sign of collapse of Syria and how things have changed very fast. So with the passage of time within this month, there's so much change that this topic has become much more important and much more impactful for Pakistan. In 1947, Pakistan was born with the promise of becoming a beacon of progress, independence, and unity in defiance against colonial rule. Yet this promise was betrayed. Instead of empowering its people and building alliances rooted in regional solidarity, the ruling elite aligned with distant imperial powers. These alliances reduced Pakistan to a mere pawn in Cold War geopolitics, isolating it from its neighbors, India, China, and the Soviet Union, and surrendering its potential to the whims of distant foreign interests. This betrayal created a devastating legacy. Rather than fostering a just and inclusive society, Pakistan's military and civil elites became entangled in militarization, corruption, and dependence, waging needless wars and enforcing policies that prioritized imperial profits over public progress. The result was a broken country and the remaining part shackled by a tyrannical military establishment, unaccountable elites, rising extremism and sectarianism, crumbling institutions, and a population trapped in poverty and despair. Yet Pakistan's story is not finished. The unipolar world that emerged after the Cold War is now collapsing, replaced by a multipolar global order. This seismic shift presents Pakistan with a rare second chance to break free from its exploitative past. Emerging alliances such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Council Organization offer pathways to realign with neighbors and reclaim sovereignty. Geographically, Pakistan occupies a position of unparalleled opportunity at the crossroads of China, India, Central Asia, and Russia. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor places the country at the heart of regional trade and development, a lifeline to untapped prosperity. Libya and Syria were not always symbols of devastation. Both were rich in resources and strategically vital, but their leaders' inability to govern responsibly, coupled with growing inequality and divisions, created fertile ground for collapse. Foreign powers intervened and exploited internal chaos for their own interests. Devastation and war followed. Pakistan faces a hauntingly similar trajectory. An uncontrollable elite, unchecked military power, widespread poverty, and sectarianism threaten its unity, while foreign forces remain poised to exploit any weakness. The choices made in the coming years will determine whether Pakistan survives as a sovereign state or collapses into violence and fragmentation under the burden of religious extremism and unfathomable inequality. The world is changing. The unipolar order that dominated the 20th century is collapsing. and Pakistan has a narrow window to reclaim its sovereignty and avoid the fate of Libya and Syria. To do so, it must address the root causes of the fragility: entrenched corruption, authoritarianism, sectarianism, and foreign dependence. Will Pakistan seize this opportunity or squander it yet again? The responsibility does not lie only with the elites or the military. It also lies with the people of Pakistan. Pakistan's future depends on its citizens rising above their political, ethnic, sectarian, and linguistic differences to wrest control from the corrupt elite and authoritarian institutions that have prioritized imperial and personal interests over national welfare. In order to discuss these issues, we have a very knowledgeable panel of participants who have a diverse background, from studies of military and military strategy to politics to economics. So first of all, I would invite Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, who is a prominent Pakistani intellectual whose seminal work on the Pakistani military, the book named Military Inc., was a bombshell in Pakistani politics, which exposed the military's business and economic interests in, and how it benefits while whole country suffers. So, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, what do you think in these 2 weeks, the way the world has shifted, and what new threats it poses to Pakistan, considering that Pakistan has almost similar kind of situations which are existing in other countries: internal strife, ethnic, sectarian differences. Does the responsibility lies with the Pakistani ruling elite and especially military to unite the country and make the progress possible so that we can be united and stand against any shenanigans from the Western powers?
Right, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me to this forum. I'm really honored. Firstly, just a matter of introduction. I am not just the author of Military Inc., but I've written another book, which is my first book, which was on armed procurement decision making. It was again also an original work in that it describes how military makes its decision. So that's end of my introduction. You know, I was listening to what you said about how the world has changed. Now, the world has become messier. And what we're going to see in the coming days or months is a breakup of Syria almost at the same level as perhaps Libya. And that, the impact of that breakup is going to be around the Middle East and adjoining regions. And that includes, of course, Pakistan. Al-Jolani, the way he has come back, is also the return of what I consider, Sunni militancy in the Muslim world. That's going to be very exciting. And while we look at how, we focus on global politics, how Russia has been pushed back, how Iran has been pushed back, how Turkey is finding a new place, how Israel is trying to secure itself, or how United States is playing its politics, what is not being talked about is that what's going to happen in the Muslim world. There's going to be more chaos, for example, between the Shia world and the Sunni world. I was reading the statement that was pushed out by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, really eulogizing what has happened in Syria. Other militant groups have also made similar statements. Suddenly, we have Jaish-e-Mohammed, who for the longest fought Pakistan's war in Kashmir, kind of eulogizing what is the developments in Syria. So definitely there's going to be an impact. Now, perhaps Pakistan is not exactly going the way Syria has, but Pakistan doesn't have an opportunity and this is what I'll challenge. You know, any country can create an opportunity and not create an opportunity. Opportunity, or when we say so and so has an opportunity, you and I have an opportunity, defends also the need to assess what is the reality, what are the factors around us. And the fact of the matter is that Pakistan is really a very troubled state. And while there is the need for balancing between United States and China, Pakistan doesn't have the capacity to do the balancing. And that is where the problem lies. The issue of Pakistan trying to find a balance is not something which has happened immediately after the development in Syria. I mean, this is an issue which has been hanging around Pakistan's neck for about at least 2 to 3 years now, if not more. And, you know, we had CPEC, we had breakdown of CPEC. And what Pakistan is finding an issue with is trying to find a strength to balance between two powers and say, look, I don't want to kind of deal with your problem with the other power. I have my own interest and I'm going to be friends with you and I'm going to be friends to the other. What we've seen recently, in fact, today or maybe yesterday, India has signed one of the largest contracts, and India will be one of the biggest importers of Russian oil. And that Russian oil is going to be then processed and then exported to Europe. Pakistan, on the other hand, finds it so difficult to talk to Russia. We find it difficult to take CPEC further. And so these factors are there. The tensions between greater powers are there. Syria is one development, but then we also see that there is Donald Trump who's going to come to power. We are expecting that perhaps there's going to be a cooling down of the war in Ukraine, maybe a bit more dialogue between Russia and United States. We find it very difficult to find a route for ourselves. And I think one of the things that we need to focus on primarily is our own region. And we're typically going into the region, into regional politics in a very traditional way, in a status quo fashion, in a revisionist fashion. Our revisionism is our status quo. So my argument is that despite Pakistan's claims and the government's claims that, we want to talk to India, India doesn't want to talk to us, the fact of the matter is that while India doesn't want to talk to Pakistan, Pakistan is not keen to talk to India either. It's a lot of pretense that we want to talk to India. No, we don't want to talk to India because there's nothing on the table. If say we go to India and say, all right, let's talk, let's decide something. There is nothing on the negotiation table. India on its own has gone ahead. It's held elections in Kashmir, in Indian Kashmir. One of the largest turnout in elections has happened, 58%. They're most possibly going to give statehood to Kashmir, nothing to do with Pakistan. So what does Pakistan then negotiate with India? That is the issue. And for that, there are two sides to it. One, that both sides have no longer anything to offer to each other. Pakistan is still using the old tricks, which is, pushing Jaish-e-Mohammed every now and then, attacks in Jammu and saying, look, we are serious people to look at. You need to talk to us. But I don't think that negotiations will go anywhere on that. The other is that I think there is a decision to be had. And I think this is where the problem lies. Pakistan as a nation, the elite of Pakistan need to seriously think about where do they want to take Pakistan.
I think that this is a
That's
good
where the
point
problem is.
where maybe we can bring Ammar Ali Jan,
Sure.
who is a prominent intellectual academic from Pakistan, who has been let go from multiple places because of his progressive politics. But he's very active, and he recently contested the elections on February 8th also. He has a deep eye on the situation in Pakistan. So, Ammar, question to you is, do you agree with Dr. Aisha Siddiqa that Pakistan does not have the opportunity to balance, and it does not have capacity to balance between different powers for its own interest? And coming back to her last point, where she pointed out that elite has to decide, do you think our elite can think beyond their personal interest? Because I seriously believe that a lot they do for imperial powers, but a lot they do for their own personal interest. Do they have willingness, and do they realize the challenges faced by Pakistan?
Thank you so much, Umar Saab, and thank you. It was a delight listening to Dr. Aisha Siddiqa as always. And I agree with her overall assessment that Pakistan is in a very difficult situation, primarily because the way the elites have shaped Pakistan over the last 70 years, and you alluded to that as well, is that it's become an economy that is addicted to war dollars. So dollars associated with wars. In Pakistan, opposition movements are now calling them dollari jange. So wars fought for dollars. And this was part of a plan to make Pakistan have a very peculiar role in the region after the decolonization that happened that began in the 1940s. Now, I would like to say a little bit about the nature of the global order, and then I'd like to go back to Dr. Aisha, and maybe she could tell us what are the options now and what's the way forward. You see, the questions of our times have changed, not just over the last 2 weeks, most dramatically over the last 2 weeks, but also over the past few years. In the 19th century, it was very clear that you have a colonial system, and a colonial system that needed to reproduce itself, and it needed loyal subjects. This was in India, Africa, other places. And the question for a lot of local populations was, how do you close the gap in education, science, technology, and slowly get some kind of representation within the system? After the First World War, 1919, the question changed, and you had the eruption of anti-colonial movements, not just in India, with the Jallianwala Bagh massacre being a major event, but also in Egypt, in other parts of Africa, Arab world. So you had this wave of anti-colonial or decolonial nationalism that gripped the world. So the question was, how do you organize it and win? After 1947, the big question was how to create nation states that can reject these centuries of humiliation and exploitation, and build states that are oriented towards the welfare of the people, but also can defend their people militarily from foreign powers. Now, this is also a period in which two big things are happening. One, the old colonial world is going away, Britain, France, Belgium. So European countries are fading, and you have the rise of the US, which is a different kind of an empire, which is not interested in direct colonialism in different parts of the world, but wants to maintain power through neocolonial means. And you have the rise of the Soviet Union, the socialist bloc, and third world nationalist movements. So this is a very serious challenge to the global imperial order in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And the strategy that the US deploys during this period is to create certain groups and institutions that can do America's bidding in their own countries. And through this process, it was actually the institution of the military, on which Dr. Aisha Siddiqa has written fantastic books. It's the institution of the military that became the favored institution for the Americans, not just in Pakistan, but also in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Argentina, in Brazil. There's a whole international architecture that was created by the US through a web of military pacts, CETO-CENTO being very important for us in Pakistan, that we signed in the 1950s. And there were two aspects of this, basically, of the strategy. The main aspect, of course, the main purpose was to contain socialism and contain some kind of anti-colonial third world nationalism. And there was a military component to that by putting these countries in these military pacts, by training their officers in the US, the Indonesian officers, the Filipino officers, the Pakistani officers, officers from the Khaliji states, officers from across the third world were being trained in the US so that they can do America's bidding once they return. But also there was an economic dimension where, in order to create this kind of imperial hegemony, they wanted these countries to remain economically dependent. And then you have the IMF, the World Bank, later WTO. But one thing that was important, even in that period, even through the economic exploitation, was to give some notion of development, because they also wanted to win over certain layers of the third world. Now, coming to the current period, I think that era is over. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, two things are happening. One, America feels there's no big global threat, which is now changing with the emergence of China. But also another problem for the US is that the US is not an industrial powerhouse the way it used to be in the 1940s. Its industries have shifted to Asia, and you have this rise of this new giant, China. The new strategy for the US is not to try to win over countries through economic development. In fact, one report just shows that 41% of budgets across the third world are being spent on repaying loans. So we're not in an era of development. We are in an era of de-development. Countries are being de-developed. And those countries who still want to resist, they get sanctions. Cuba, Venezuela, there's a list of about 60, 70 countries in the world that are sanctioned. They are pushed to not only sanctions, but then you have proxy wars, and Middle East is one example of the proxy wars, or you have direct Western bombardment, which is what's happened in the case of Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen. So the point of these IMF conditionalities, which push privatizations. If you don't do that, then sanctions. If that doesn't work, then proxy wars. If that doesn't work, then Western bombardment. The point of all of this is to destroy the state capacity of all these countries, the capacity of states. So what we are entering an era, or have entered an era of in which destruction is the primary mode of communication that empire has with the rest of the world. And it's a destruction without reconstruction, because after 45, the US reconstructed Europe through the Marshall Plan, reconstructed Japan, spent a lot of money in Taiwan and other places. Now it's pure destruction. Afghanistan is a lesson in that. Iraq is a lesson in that. So I'll just end my presentation here by saying that we have this dual task now. And this is something, and here I again would like to agree with Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. The Pakistani state is oriented towards getting these rents from the US to do its bidding in the region. It has not oriented itself for long-term development. It has not oriented itself towards industrialization. It has not oriented itself towards the development of its own people, not just productive resources. So with that kind of a big gap, this kind of a paranoid national security state is one, it loses legitimacy internally, and externally, it can very quickly go back into the American ambit if America doesn't need to convince Pakistanis, it needs to convince a few people in Pindi. And unless we overcome this crisis of legitimacy, and we reorient ourselves from being a decadent national security state, which is fighting for other countries and for other peoples who wants to be included in the stories of other countries rather than writing its own script, writing its own history, will remain powerless. So the only way we can use the opportunities that arise is by asserting a new will and which is oriented towards long-term development of our people, of our country, which requires regional integration.
Thank you, Amar, for your detailed overview of the history and current situation. I would go back to Dr. Siddiqa, and first of all, thank you very much that you are traveling and during you have stopped your car to participate in our conference. And Amar more or less did agree with you, your very pessimistic outlook. But do you see any, because the way what happened to Bashar al-Assad, forget about any ideology or ideals or something, just for personal preservation, because when the societies are very weak, they collapse. Look at how Syria just collapsed, before that Iraq, before that Libya. All these countries just collapsed because there was internally so much strife. So do you think, just given for their personal preservation, our elite, both civil and military, they have this long-term view where they would want to unite the country or bring some reform or lower their dictatorial instincts, so they can at least have some footing where they can talk to the Western powers, America, on some from some powerful power base?
So let me get back to what Amar said, and let me just point out one thing. One is that let's not forget that the China that we're looking at is not an emblem of socialist power. China itself is now, today, a capitalist power. And the battle that we are seeing between United States and China is not between a socialist power and a capitalist power. It's between two capitalist forces. China doesn't care about where the people in Pakistan go. It is also invested in Pakistan's military. And that's where its force and its fate lies. There is very little communication, by the way, between the people of Pakistan and the people in China. There is very little that the people in China know about the people in Pakistan, and vice versa. So I don't think it's a battle between a socialist or a capitalist. I mean, I just want to challenge that. Now, coming to your question of, and one other thing, what happened to Bashar al-Assad? It's not just that he, if you look at the videos of people who were in jail, this was an authoritarian regime which was going to collapse, and it collapsed because then the forces, the regional forces, which is Israel, thought, why allow it to become a base for Hezbollah? Although Bashar al-Assad did not have the best of relations with Hezbollah, but Syria, being an adjoining territory, was still a base. So that was, eliminated. So a regional power, Israel, pushed, and it got, Bashar al-Assad got pushed out. The other reason that Bashar al-Assad was defeated was because he wasn't really capitalizing on his partners. And at one point, Russia thought, there was no point investing in this guy, and so they backed out. One has to look at what will be the future strategy. I don't think that Iran or Russia completely pulled out of the Middle East, but what will be the new strategy is something to look at. Now, coming to your question of where does Pakistani elite take us? The problem is that the Pakistani elite is so caught in its momentary planning. I'll tell you a bit of a joke. So I was asking a friend, who was a retired officer of the military in Austin. This was last year. And I was asking him a question about something in the military. He says, when is this event going to happen? I said, a year and a half later. And he laughed. He said, listen, for a country like Pakistan, you don't think in a year and a half term. Think in 3 terms, 3 months term. 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, every 3 months, then we revise our thinking. So you can no longer take a long-term view. And this assessment, I thought, was a very sad reflection of how our elite thinks. I mean, if you look at Pakistan's current political status, you would see that there is no assessment of where situation stands. I mean, when I look at, for example, post-Syria situation, my real concern is what's going to happen, for example, to the Shia militants in Pakistan. The Sunni militancy is going to push them out. And there's going to be a pressure on us to push back, Iranian-backed militants. I mean, Shia militants who have gone and fought on the side of the Shias in Syria. So there is a problem at hand. And, this is a real crisis in Pakistan, that be it military leadership or the civilian leadership, they are thinking in very short spaces. Nobody is looking at, and I don't see that Pakistan right now is going to go the Syria way. It's going to be, it's in a deep emotional crisis. I mean, if you ask me, is Pakistan intact emotionally? I'll say, no, it's not. You have Balochistan, which doesn't want to remain part of Pakistan. You have tribal areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa who are very unhappy and miserable. Every person is miserable. Then there is a political contestation within the country. There is PTI versus rest of the political parties. There is no dialogue happening. No political party, no political player, major political player is ready to think long-term about Pakistan. Now, if you have that kind of a situation, why are you expecting me to kind of even argue that there is a political plan out there for Pakistan? There isn't any, sadly. So you're mute.
Yeah, I think this is a good point where I would like to involve Dr. Umar Murad, who is old Pakistani political activist, and he has a keen eye on the economic aspect of Pakistan's options. So, as Dr. Aisha Siddiqa said, that she doesn't think there's any long-term plan for Pakistan. But do you think Pakistan has any economic options given how it is embroiled in all these loans and foreign debt, and where they can't even meet the payments of those foreign debts, where they don't have enough, our revenues are not capable of even paying for the salaries of our armed forces. So does Pakistan have any economic options? Does it want to, and can it play China against Russia, against America, irrespective of if they are both capitalist, but with different characteristics, let's say that. So does Pakistan have any options?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And the other thing is that there was an interesting and intellectually stimulating discussion. I was very keenly listening to Dr. Aisha Siddiqa because she, has a very good handle over Pakistani politics, because she has a handle over Pakistan Army, and which is in fact, the only living institution in Pakistan. So she did initially give a very good assessment and a very dismal assessment, because this is how things are because of all our previous policies. And then Ammar gave a wow description of exactly, what America is doing and how economically it has bound not just us, but so many other developing countries into its shackles, which it does not plan to go ahead and change in any way. In fact, now more so shackled and entangled with no development or progress, more chaos. So coming now back to your question, I would actually make this question, in fact, a question, because I am here in America for the last 20 years and I practice as a doctor in an area, rural America, where essentially it votes for Trump. Over here, there's a free hand to American capitalism. There's no stopping. Almost all corporations, they can do what they want. And a common man over here cannot afford his medicine, his hospital's care, his justice, his basic necessities are not taken care of. And then I went to China, where I see that people are taken care of. But how? Because China, unlike American capitalism, this is where I would answer that or kind of differ with Dr. Aisha, that Chinese capitalism is not American capitalism because it owns the problems of its people. It wants to own their education, their basic necessities. It does not play a stock market or gamble with that. So this is why China and Russia, not in essence Russia, but China is different from America and American capitalism. And this is exactly why this whole new world order is coming in place, because if it would have been the same, then US businessmen would have been owning most of the Chinese corporations along with Chinese and exploiting their own people. China doesn't want to do that. Russia does not want America to make the decisions for itself because it had a revolution. It changed its whole, it actually forced its elite. Elites are never in any country going to listen to you. You have to make them listen. So this is where Pakistan Army comes in this picture, and Pakistan Army, as the only institution, has to go ahead and come up with a solution where now, with this changing world order, knowing we are heading straight into an economic disaster. Our poor do not have a credit card, they do not have a social net, they do not have anything. If inflation goes at this rate, we're going to go in anarchy. So how do they come up with a solution? Either give land, every Pakistani 500 yards of house, distribute the land in Pakistan. Come up with new inventive ideas like Europe did, like Soviet Union did, to go ahead and empower people, to get them by your side and get out of this entanglement. How? I don't know. But yes, it has to be done, and this is a second chance. This is what I feel. We missed the boat when Russia and China were doing economic development in every country they put their hands on, like India, like infrastructure building. Now we don't have that option. We only have an option now to have independent decision-making for us, like China. China will not come in and, she's right, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, China is no longer going to import its socialism or communism. We can make our own decisions and go ahead and make decisions for our masses, like you said. We want a economic system that serves our masses, same like Ammar. So this is what I think. Economics is, in short, economics is Mao was a librarian. He just basically said, this is the money, it goes here. Now all the scientists, all the engineers, everybody who now starts working on it to make sure that economics works. So this is what economics is essentially telling where the money goes. This is where you fight with imperialism.
So Ammar, as we have listened to your assessment, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa's, and on economic front, what Murad says, a lot depends on the elite deciding to do something for people. But as you guys said, that their elite is not willing to change their tune. They only think in 3 months term. They don't care about people. You have been involved in politics in Pakistan, and what is there? Because the net losers will be Pakistani people. They are right now, but if things change and if kind of situation which is in Syria, or Libya happened 5 years down the road, if it happens, it's the people of Pakistan who will suffer. Do you see some hope? Do you see some light somewhere that people can force, people can unite, come out, get over their sectarian, ethnic, linguistic differences and force the elite to work for the welfare of Pakistan, or people are just so entangled with their own differences that they have stopped looking at the bigger picture or thinking long term?
Well, thank you, Manbhai. I think the status quo right now, internationally, we've already talked about it. It's unstable because it continues to demand more and more from ordinary people in the global south. So I gave you one figure of 41% that is being spent from the budgets of the third world to repay loans. In Pakistan, that is 56%. Now, for a poor country like Pakistan, you take these loans, the elites take these loans. They've never come to ordinary people. They never reach ordinary people. 80% of the water in the country is undrinkable. The hospitals are in a terrible situation. 25 million children are out of school. Unemployment is rising. Inflation is was almost hit 40% at one point. And malnourishment is at 42%. So this is the kind of overall architecture we're looking at. And in that, you're not able to tax the elites. One example is Gymkhana, this one club in Lahore, which is on prime property on the Mall Road. And per year, you'll be surprised to hear how much tax they give. 5,000 rupees a year. That's Lahore Gymkhana. While looking at, if you look at what ordinary people have to give in terms of through inflation and rising prices, they're basically sacrificing their own children and their future, their health, their livelihoods in order to repay loans that the elites consume. So really, it's become a weird kind of a feudalistic system where people have to spend a major part of their labor to keep these elites happy. It's a kind of a serfdom that we're living through. Now, this is no way to live a dignified life. In the short run, I don't think that we can see an immediate kind of an alternative emerging. I think the Pakistani state is facing the biggest crisis of legitimacy in its history since 71. And today in Pakistan, it's 16 December. So this is the day when the generals surrendered in Dhaka after genocidal forms of violence against our own people. They were our own citizens. So after 53 years, we've still not learned those lessons.
16 December is also the day when they sacrificed their own children in APS.
APS, absolutely.
But they didn't change their tune.
Absolutely. It's basically this boomerang, this destructive policy of exporting jihad that came back to haunt us. Now, one thing, however, I think the good thing that's available for us to actually hold on to in terms of hope is that the crisis of legitimacy means two things. Either will go down further, which is very much a possibility, or in the coming years, there will be potential to organize on a different basis. Because remember, 2 years, 3 years ago, it was difficult for us to take the positions that we were taking, which were, against the national security state, which was against this kind of sucking up of Pakistan's resources to make this small caste, mostly in uniform, but also civilian, enjoy their perks while ordinary people sacrifice their future. People were not willing to listen to that. Today, people are willing to listen to that. People are fed up of these elites. If you look at TikTok, if you look at social media, it's very hard to speak in favor of the state now. So this is a huge shift that's happened. What that means is that people have rejected the status quo. That doesn't mean that an alternative has emerged. And I do believe what PTI is offering is unfortunately pure negation. It is a lot of negative energy, but there's not a program on how will you come out of the IMF. Remember when Khan Saab was the prime minister, he eventually gave the state bank to an IMF employee, Raza Bakir. So to build an alternative, we need to do a lot of work. And this is where I say what we need is a slow impatience. We need to be impatient because the situation is really bad, but we also have to be slow. We have to build institutions. We can't expect these, leftists to become celebrities overnight. Even if they do become that, it will not change anything. We need to slowly build organizations, student organizations, trade union. 1% of the workforce is organized in trade unions in Pakistan. We have to take it up to 10, 15, 20%, and we can do it. Similarly, with farmers associations, we can do it. We have to build this infrastructure. It might take 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. That's not a very long time. The Shanghai massacre in China happened in 1927, which was this attack against the left. 80,000 comrades were killed. And that's what led to the rethinking, which created the Chinese Communist Party in the form that it is today. And then 20 years struggle, which led to the liberation of China in 1949. I'll just end by making one comment on China and socialism. I think when we talk about any kind of international system, the questions for any ideology are questions that are specific to its own time. So for its own time, the question for the Communist Party of China in the 1950s, 60s, 70s was to carry out an anti-feudal revolution, which it did. In the 70s, 80s, the question changed. The question was, can China develop its productive forces? And at that point, remember, this is the onset of neoliberalism, the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was an isolating period for China if China had maintained the position that it did in the 60s, 70s. So it opened up. But as Dr. Murad was saying, it opened up to the world economy, but by keeping the commanding heights of the economy in the state sector. So 60% of corporations are owned by the public sector. Similarly, the bank's finance system is owned by the public. The social media is very much regulated by the Chinese state, and that's very important for the data. So the data remains with the Chinese state, and it's a huge data war between corporations and China because of that. So China's strategy of building socialism, it has been very, very different because of the different circumstances. But the overall thrust is China knows that America wants the destruction of state sovereignty. It wants the destruction of economic sovereignty. It wants the destruction of military sovereignty. It wants a destruction of cultural sovereignty. And it's imposing this destruction on a whole host of countries. And this is the big question which socialists or any person from any ideology will have to address. You cannot have any kind of socialism or even civilization if states collapse the way they've collapsed in Libya or Syria or other places. So we have to build that foundation. And that fight, I believe, cannot be fought by elites who are willing to strip the state of its capacity. Remember, Pakistani elites have been very anti-state. They've actually given up to every demand of the IMF. They accuse us of being anti-state. They accuse us of being seditious. But they have given up to every demand of the IMF, of the WTO, of Pentagon, of any kind of global power.
Amar,
So,
let me bring, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa in the debate. Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, as Amar said, that the only opportunity we have is this slow organization, while there is this immediate threat, but we need to organize. Do you think, and your long study of Pakistani military and their structures and their economic interests, that can population unite, if it can be united, and can it force the military elite to change their policies? Or they are so powerful and so entrenched that that is not a hope. There is no hope of people ever forcing them to work for the welfare of people.
I've been listening to this debate and it's very interesting. And, to a certain extent, I agree with Amar. In fact, to a large extent, that this elite is not going to take the first step. But the problem is, where do we find the leadership? I mean, I remember when different events started in Pakistan. My argument always was that this is not the Arab Spring for Pakistan. And we are not going to get an Arab Spring. You know, people coming out together. We don't see that. The military, why should, you said earlier on while, opening up the debate that, there are financial crisis. The military is not getting paid. No, I'm sorry, sir. I don't agree there. Military is getting paid. They are getting their pays. In fact, there was a mini budget in which 60 billion rupees were added to the defense budget.
No, I said
Very,
that
very,
our
very.
current
No.
revenues do not cover, so we have to take
So we have been financing our military budget. 97% of Pakistan's 97% of your federal budget goes towards debt financing, towards interest payment. And that basically means that most of our government pays are met through, debt servicing, through borrowing. And for the military, it doesn't matter. It just got itself another additional 45 billion rupees in the name of providing security for the Chinese. I mean, we don't, and I think that providing security for the Chinese is not just a matter of capacity or lack of money. It's a matter of intent. We don't intend to. Now, one quick thing which I want to kind of present. I mean, the gentleman in the United States, he's probably seen more of China than I have, but I don't agree that, China is entirely comfortable. There is Xinjiang, there are the Muslims in Xinjiang who are very uncomfortable, who don't have a right to speak. And there are other issues in China as well. I mean, why are we just looking at China as perhaps the only other option that we have there? I mean, we are also getting embroiled in the great power game that is about to be fought or that is being cooked up. So I don't think that becoming part of any of the great games is going to serve our interests, number one. Number two, I don't think that the military, Pakistani military in particular, is about to change its tack and say, all right, let's shift. And in fact, the problem is that way back in 2017, it was a military. It was a political government which was engaging with China, and it was the military which decided that no, this is not the engagement that we want, that Pakistan wants. It still want to be part of the US security constellation, where we don't have a major role, yet we still want to be part of it. And I don't think that they're going to, extricate themselves from that. Now, as far as China is concerned, what has happened is that when we look at Pakistan-China relations, we're looking at three different relationships. There is a military security relationship, which is very good. Pakistan's frigates, Pakistan's submarines, Pakistan's aircrafts, they all come from China. So that military security relationship is very good. But what's gone down is the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, where, people would benefit. And part of the problem why that relationship has gone down is that Pakistani government, political government, never planned it. And we've worked on it, we planned it precisely the way we have planned our relationships with the United States. That it was the US which was kind of making the plans, how much money Pakistan wants, how much money to be given to Pakistan. This is exactly the same thing that we did with China. And let's not forget that you have a number of countries in Africa which are under great debt burden, Chinese debt burden. our debt burden, Pakistan's major debt burden today is domestic. And a lot of, in fact, the Chinese debt is much lower. But the problem is that we don't have a plan of where we want to take that relationship. We're not even brave enough to negotiate our relationship with, with Russia. India negotiates with Russia. We don't have the strength to do it. What Chinese are constantly insisting, improve our security so we can start working on CPEC phase 2. Pakistan, very reluctant to do that. And, I'll tell you something, a very interesting story. This is when I worked for a couple of years with the military as well. I was director of naval research. And I remember this is post 1998. We had just tested our nuclear weapons. There was American arms embargo. And that was the time when we had bought our first Augusta, French Augusta submarine was coming to Pakistan. Now, what we had done at that point in time, we had not signed a contract for the torpedoes for the submarine. So the Navy was completely lost. I mean, the first submarine was going to come, what we're going to do. And so one of my suggestions, in fact, was that, why don't we go ahead and sell the Brooke and Garcia class, the frigates that Americans had recalled. We had them during the 90s, and we were asked to return those. We had stripped the frigates of these missiles. Said, why don't we sell them in the black market? That's the only way. And there was so much fear of actually going ahead and acting on it. Nobody wanted to. They were like, no, what will the Americans say? My answer was, we are under embargo. We can always turn around and say, hey, you have embargoed us. Where do we get the money from? But there is that fear. I mean, our elite, the problem with our elite. Now, I completely agree with Amar when he says that this elite is not going to go and change the plan for Pakistan. Completely agree. Problem is, where is the alternative leadership? I mean, these are wonderful gentlemen. Amar is a great guy. There is this leftist socialist thinking. But the problem is that where we are, where the people stand, the leftist parties hardly have a politics.
Let's ask
So
Amar.
let me just finish very quickly. I think the problem there is that the alternative to these other parties, unfortunately, and I think this is where I am very afraid of what will happen the day PTI collapses in Pakistan. The other alternative will be the religious parties. Have we created a new alternative? And have we publicized that narrative? People are very angry. People are speaking against the military like they've never done before. But is there a political movement solid enough to push them back? I don't see it.
So Amar,
I stop here.
Here you have the I guess $1 million question, that where we are going to get that organization. As you know, in Pakistan, this conduit through which new political leadership comes used to be students and labor. There has been such deterioration. Students' unions have been banned under military governments, and our democratic governments have not allowed the elections or organization going on. Similarly with trade unions, even during Ziaul Haq's martial law, there were much more organization than there is now. So and you have a state which under our current leadership of our army, they are sermonizing that, you go kill somebody if they don't listen to you. They want to go. They are thinking in terms of they're in 50s and 60s. While they are so fearful, I just saw today the message from your party's president, Farooq Tariq, that they were going to hold this environment rally. It wasn't a political rally. from Shimla Pahadi to somewhere in Lahore, and the police took over the Mount Shimla Pahadi, and they did. I don't know what happened in the end, if they let them hold the process. So there is this state which is very coercive, which is not changing a little bit. I would say they have become more like, from General Bajwa in the end was willing to even talk to India, and he was talking about geo-economic. But since the new dispensation has come in, they have become much more strict. They have become much more dictatorial. So I understand your argument, and I agree with you that we need to organize. But how? Where such a violence, such indiscriminate dictatorship is ruling, how you will find that hope?
Umar Sahib, I think this is $1 million question. So on the Pakistani state, the Pakistani state is no longer a normal kind of a post-colonial state. There is an attempt in any kind of a sovereign state to build some kind of a consent. State leadership, institutions, politicians, they like to be liked. They spend a lot of money fooling people into liking them. There's an entire marketing industry to make politicians, and in the case of Pakistan, make the generals look good. I think the current leadership of the state has decided that it is good to be liked, but you don't need to be liked, and it's better to be feared. And this is a very old, like 1930s, 40s kind of a colonial state. I've written about it as well, that the ethos of the current leadership is not like the ethos of the 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, Ayub Khan had, tried winning over people through this development model that he had. Yahya Khan tried giving a LFO and a constitution and elections, and that was his idea of winning over people. Ziaul Haq had Islam to sell. Musharraf had liberalism to sell. You know, everybody had some kind of an agenda. It was all very hypocritical, no doubt about that, but they at least had a narrative. The current leadership has given up on any narrative. They feel you don't need a narrative as long as people are scared. You have guns, you have stakes, you have jails, you have the capacity to abduct people, you have censorship. So it's very much like the 1930s and 1940s, where the colonial British state in India, they gave up on any pretense of wanting to be liked. And they made it very clear that what we want you to do is to fear us. And since, Jallianwala Bagh, when they, in the aftermath of the Jallianwala Bagh, they made people crawl in the streets. And in Gujranwala, they made a law that anybody who sees a white officer has to leave everything and salute that person. This is the kind of nonsense that they did. And you're seeing that level of madness coming in. Today, you're right, the Party Hakuk Party did a rally for against climate change. And it was basically farmers who were coming from different parts of Punjab. And, it was a rally of literally 300-400 people. But the state felt that they had to show their presence. They did eventually. There were scuffles, and they did allow them. But this is how the state is thinking now. What Dr. Aisha Siddiqa has said, I 100% agree with the scale of the crisis. And one thing that she pointed out, which I think people should pay heed to, is that after PTI, there's religious parties, and by religious parties in Punjab, we should talk about Tehreek-e-Labbaik, TLP. That is a growing phenomenon. They have the infrastructure in rural Punjab and large parts of Sindh. Sindh is also, and we interviewed Dr. Aisha Siddiqa on this, how important, how powerful TLP can be in Sindh. They have that infrastructure through shrines.
But they won two seats from Karachi.
They won two seats, and from the most progressive area, Lyari, which was the hotbed of leftism back in the day. So, in that sense, my claim is being charismatic, being good speakers, being educated is not enough to build something. You need an infrastructure. So this is something that I keep telling young people who are entering the left, that you're not going to be Che Guevara's. Our generation, and even one more generation, will basically be the generation that will do the necessary work that can allow for Fidel Castro's and Che Guevara's and all kinds of leaders to emerge, which means we have to slowly start building the infrastructure. So, Pakistan Progressive Forum is a fantastic step in that direction. We're trying to organize the diaspora, because the diaspora is very, very important, and people should actually join PPF and look it up after this event. But also, building student groups, building social media. We have a red room that we're building as a social media enterprise. We want more investments on social media so our ideas can be disseminated. But on the ground, we have to build patiently in working class areas. We have to build trade unions. We have to build student organizations. We have to build farmers associations. They can be built. It's never impossible. And even if it's impossible, the left job is always to hold on to the promise of the impossible. So we must fight for the impossible other world, and we must believe in it. And without that kind of utopian impulse, it's impossible to do alternative politics. Because one thing is clear: if the status quo continues, society is going to collapse. So if we patiently build an alternative, I think for 5 years, 10 years from now, with People's Party collapsing, Noon League collapsing, and PTI, of course, the leader is a leader-based party. He's 72. In 10 years, there'll be a huge vacuum, and we have to start preparing for that vacuum from now onwards. And we all are already doing it, but we have to be more determined in our fight.
Okay, Amar, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Actually, we ran over time. So on this hopeful note, I would like to thank Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, who joined us while traveling, and hopefully now she has gotten home safely. And Ammar Ali Jan, Umar Murad, and Dr. Syed Akbar Zaidi also joined us, but due to technical reasons, he wasn't able to stay with us. We thank you all, and we will keep on this conversation going. I would urge people to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and look up Pakistan Progressive Front. And we are trying to do whatever we can living outside of the country, and show also that there is not just regressive forces, but there are progressive forces also who are working for Pakistan and its bright future. On that note, I thank you all the participants and all the viewers who joined us. And until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
आपको तो बहुत लेट होगा,